Hello and welcome to A Word for This Day podcast. I'm Jori Schaefer, the show's host and creator, and it is my joy and my pleasure to welcome you today. Welcome back to all you regular listeners. I'm thankful that you are here. I love being on this journey with you. And welcome to anyone who's here for the first time. It's no accident that you are here today, friend, so please don't run off quite yet. Please stick around and let's see what the Lord has for us today. I continue to pray for you frequently that the Lord would draw you closer to Him and give you more of a desire to know Him, and that you will be intentional about spending time with Him, about thinking about His Word, about meditating on His Word, studying His Word, that you'll have a hunger and thirst for His righteousness, and then that you'll not only read and study His Word, but you'll live it out and share it with those that you come in contact with. Please continue to share this podcast with your friends, family, neighbors, strangers, just anyone who you think may receive a blessing from it. And know that I love to hear from you. I love to hear what God's doing in your life as you're spending more time with Him. Well, our verse for the day for July the 12th, 2024 comes from 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12, and it reads as follows from the Legacy Standard Bible. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and he named it Ebenezer. And he said, "Thus far Yahweh has helped us." Oh, friends, I love this example. I love what we see that Samuel did, and it's such an example for us to recall and to remember and to bring to mind the goodness and the faithfulness of our covenant-keeping God. When things are just kind of swirling all around and seem to be turned upside down and difficult, we can always go back to what we know is true about God. And when things are good and we're having an easy time, we could go back and remember the goodness and the faithfulness of God. It is good to dwell on these things. It is good to dwell on all that is right and true and lovely and admirable, and those are all things about God. So I'm excited for us to park here and get this story and see what was going on. You know, we see that other of the heroes of the faith often would make an altar or a remembrance stone or stack stones or something like that as a memorial or a remembrance of what God has done. So we are in this book of 1 Samuel. We're in the Old Testament again today. We've been there for this is the third day in a row, and Lord willing, we'll be there 2 more days after this in a row. That's just the way things fell this month. But 1 Samuel is one of those books in the Old Testament history section. Remember that the Old Testament begins with the 5 books of the law, then it moves into Old Testament history, then into what is known as the wisdom and poetry literature, and then the major prophets and the minor prophets. And that is how the Old Testament is organized. We have talked about recently and frequently about how after the children of Israel were led by Moses out of Egypt into the wilderness, and then they were there for 40 years, and then Joshua led them from the wilderness into the promised land, and God had given them judges after Joshua died to help lead and direct and lead them in battle and all these sorts of things. And those judges were different than what we think of as judges today. They were more leaders than determining matters of law, it seemed. But God had sent several different judges at different times over several years, and we've talked about that in the book of Judges. And we see that there would also be prophets. And this Samuel that we're talking about today was both a judge and a prophet. I believe he was the last judge before Israel had a king. and he was the one that God used to anoint the first king of that united kingdom of Israel. And we talked about that several times, how there was one king originally over those 12 tribes, and then later, after that king was Saul, and then after Saul came David, after David came Solomon, and then because of Solomon's disobedience, the kingdom was split, or disobedience, the kingdom was split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and God continued to send prophets to those groups, and we talked about that quite a bit yesterday. But this part where we're in is kind of this transition period. You know, as the people went into the promised land, God had told them if they would obey him, if they would follow his ways, if they would keep the laws and the statutes that he had given Moses to give them while they were in the wilderness, if they would continue to put him first, that he would take care of them. He would go before them. He would do all the things that they needed, but they would often forget that, and they would turn away from the Lord, and they would not do what was right in his eyes, even though he had showed them time and time again of his faithfulness and that he would fight for them. Sometimes he would give them over, and they would be punished. They would be overtaken by the nations in which they had been told if they would follow God and trust him completely, that he would overthrow those nations. But when they were disobedient, God would often use those nations to punish them and discipline them. And so they were in a period of time where things would go good for a little while as long as they were trusting the Lord and being obedient. But as soon as they weren't, then there would be trouble. And we're in one of these episodes now, in the section that we'll get into in the verses leading up to where our chapter and verse is for the day. But as far as this book of Samuel, we are not sure who wrote this. In the original Hebrew text, this 1st and 2nd Samuel were all one book, and it's thought that they were divided for just ease of copying. But we see that this 1st Samuel opens up and tells the story of the prophet Samuel's birth and of his early years, about how his mama had prayed to the Lord. She was barren, and she had prayed for God to allow her to have a son. And then if she had a son, she would give him to the Lord all the days of his life. And that's exactly what happened. Her name was Hannah. And you can read that story at the beginning of in chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. And then Hannah prayed and gave thanks to God in chapter 2. And when it was time for Samuel to be weaned, his mama took him to the temple and to the priest whose name was Eli, and Samuel stayed there with Eli. And when Samuel was just a little boy, he heard a voice, and he thought it was Eli calling to him, and he would run in there, and Eli said, "No, it's not me. Go lay down." And I love this. I want you to hear this. It says in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "Now the young boy Samuel was ministering to Yahweh before Eli, and word from Yahweh was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. And it happened at that time, as Eli was lying down in his place, now his eyesight had begun to fade, and he could not see well, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of Yahweh, where the ark of God was, that Yahweh called Samuel, and he said, 'Here I am.' Then he ran to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you called me.' But he said, 'I did not call. Go back, lie down.' So he went and lay down. Then Yahweh called yet again, 'Samuel.' So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you called me.' But he answered, 'I did not call, my son. Go back, lie down.' Now Samuel did not yet know Yahweh, nor had the word of Yahweh yet been revealed to him. So Yahweh called Samuel again for the 3rd time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli discerned that Yahweh was calling the young boy, and Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be if he calls you that you shall say, Speak, Yahweh, for your slave is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Then Yahweh came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your slave is listening. And Yahweh said to Samuel, Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will establish against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons have been bringing a curse on themselves, but he did not rebuke them. Now therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. So Samuel lay down until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of Yahweh, but Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he said, Here I am. And he said, What is the word that he spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him, and he said, It is Yahweh. Let him do what seems good in his eyes. Thus Samuel grew, and Yahweh was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. So all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of Yahweh. And Yahweh appeared again at Shiloh, because Yahweh revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of Yahweh. So we hear here how it all began, how Samuel first heard from the Lord before he knew it was the Lord that he was hearing. And the priest Eli, as we read, had not really kept his sons in check. He knew that they were doing things that were not pleasing to God, but he did not hold them accountable, and this was going to come back on Eli. And God told Samuel that that was the case. And Samuel was afraid to tell Eli that when Eli asked him, what did he speak? What did Yahweh speak to you? But Samuel was honest with him, and then we read that God continued to speak to Samuel and give Samuel the words to give to the people, and he's going to use him in mighty ways, and we'll see that coming up here in our verse for the day. But he also then, after that, used him to anoint King Saul, then King David. So God used him mightily throughout his ministry. And as I mentioned before, he was both a prophet, as we see here, and he would speak forth the truth that God had given him, but he was also a judge. God used him as a judge, and I believe we read that he was the last judge of Israel. And so after this part, after it tells us in chapter 3 about how Samuel came to be this prophet, we read that the Philistines, who were one of those people groups who had just been against Israel from the close to the beginning of the time that they came into the Promised Land, captured the ark, and it ended up that where they took the ark, the people there would have trouble, and they knew it was because the ark of God was there. You know, we read in chapter 5 about the story of their false god, which was Dagon, and the ark was set in the place where Dagon was, even though it was just a stone. It was a stone idol. But when they would go back, went back the next day, and Dagon was on his face, and then on several different times he continued to be broken, and they realized it was because of the power of God, the mighty God. But listen to this in chapter 5, verse 7. I love this. It says, Thus the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, and said, The ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them, and said, What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of God of Israel around. Now Now it happened after they had brought it around that the hand of Yahweh was against the city with very great confusion, and he struck the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they'd moved the ark from Dagon's temple to somewhere else, to Gath, and then everybody there, many people there, both young and old, had tumors grow on them because of that the ark was there. And then it says in verse 10, so they sent the ark of God to Ekron, and as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to put us and our people to death. They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel and let it return to its own place, so that it will not put us and our people to death. For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. The hand of God was very glorious there. Now the men who did not die were struck with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. I love that. And one of the reasons that ark had been captured was because of the people's disobedience. They had not done exactly what God had told them to do. They had not stayed true to him. But wherever God's ark went, it was not good for those people that it was there, because they were not believers. They were not... it was not supposed to be in those heathen nations, or those pagan nations. And then we read in chapter 6, verse 1, now the ark of Yahweh had been in the fields of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of Yahweh? Make us know how we shall send it to its place. They wanted rid of it. So they said, if you send away the ark of God of Israel, do not send it empty, but you shall surely return to him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not turned away from you. And so they did send a guilt offering. They made these, I guess it was like replicas of the tumors and replicas of some of their mice out of gold, and put those in the ark and sent it back, and they attached it to these on a cart with 2 cattle, and sent it back, and the cows went straight to where they were supposed to go. And you can read about that in chapter 6. And at the end of chapter 6 in verse 21, it says, so they sent messengers, they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of Yahweh. Come down and take it up to you. And the men of Kiriath Jearim came and brought the ark of Yahweh up, and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and set apart Eleazar his son as holy, in order to keep the ark of Yahweh. Now it happened from the day when the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim that the time was long. It was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented over Yahweh. So they had received the ark back. They knew it had been taken away because of their guiltiness of what they had done. They knew it had graciously been brought back to them. And then it says in verse 3, then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you are to return to Yahweh with all your heart, then remove the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and set your hearts toward Yahweh, and serve him alone, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So the sons of Israel removed the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and served Yahweh alone. Then Samuel said, gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to Yahweh for you. And they gathered to Mizpah, and drew water, and poured it out before Yahweh, and fasted on that day, and said there, we have sinned against Yahweh. And Samuel judged the sons of Israel at Mizpah. Then the Philistines heard that the sons of Israel had gathered to Mizpah, and the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. Then the sons of Israel heard it, and were afraid of the Philistines. So the sons of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to Yahweh our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. And Samuel took a suckling lamb, and offered it for a whole burnt offering to Yahweh. And Samuel cried out to Yahweh for Israel, and Yahweh answered him. Now Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, and the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But Yahweh thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines, and confused them, so that they were defeated before Israel. So the men of Israel went out of Mizpah, and pursued the Philistines, and struck them down as far as below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone, and this is our verse for the day, and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and he named it Ebenezer. And he said, "Thus far, Yahweh has helped us." So do you see what happened? The ark came back. The people lamented. The people asked Samuel to pray for them. And Samuel said, "You need to get rid of all these foreign gods. You need to get rid of all this that is in your house." And they fasted and they prayed and they made sacrifices to God. And then here comes those Philistines again, those pesky Philistines to cause trouble. And when the Israelites heard they were coming, even though they seen what they had seen over and over and heard over and over again what God had done, they were afraid because they were probably remembering what happened before when the ark was taken away. And they asked Samuel to pray for them again. And so Samuel prayed, and God delivered them. He delivered the Philistines into their hand. He allowed them to even chase the Philistines down. And then in our verse for the day, he sets up a memorial. And it's so important. He says, "Thus far, Yahweh has helped us." It says he took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and he named it Ebenezer. So you'll hear people sometimes, there's an old hymn, "Come thou fount of every blessing," and it says, "Hitherto mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." And so it's a remembrance of what God has done, of his faithfulness, how he's rescued when it seemed hopeless. And they could have done that all along the path of Israel's history. Abraham would do that when he had seen the faithfulness of God. We saw that Noah built an altar to the Lord after they got off of the ark. But Samuel did that same thing here. He set that stone of remembrance, that stone to remind them, look what God has done, so that people wouldn't forget. Thus far, Yahweh has helped us. And friends, it's important for us to do that as well. That's why I think sometimes journaling is a good idea. I really do. And many will say, "Oh no, I don't have time to that," or "I'm not a writer," or "I don't have time to just write things down in a book, and who would read it?" And it may not be that anyone would read it, but it is so helpful for us to go back and look at times, even if it's just a few lines each day. That's why I've shown you in my in those short form videos that you can find on YouTube and you can find on Instagram and even TikTok, where I show you that I take our verse for the day, and then I will read it and just do a little short prayer or praise, and then write a little more in depth. But doing a prayer journal, something where you can look back and say, yes, I can be reminded about the faithfulness of God. He calls us to remember over and over and over again. He knows we are a needy people. He knows we're a forgetful people. He knows we need to be reminded. That's why I will often tell you when things are difficult and it's hard to walk by faith and not by sight, go back to what you know is true about God. And how do we know that? We go to his word. And how can we look back? Because I can look back and I can think of things where God has been so faithful to me and taking care of things that there is no way that I could have done it in my own power. There's no way I would have done it the way that God did it, and it was so much better than I would have imagined. If I would have just but trusted him from the beginning. And sometimes we need to write those down. We need to make a record of them. Whether it's for us to go back and remind ourselves when things are hard. Yes, I saw the faithfulness of God here. He is faithful just as he says. Or it may be that sometime later our descendants or people that we don't even know may pick up our journal and read this and be encouraged about the faithfulness of God. We're encouraged by what God inspired people to write in his word about his faithfulness, and so I think it's so important. Now, do you have to journal to be a Christian? No. Is that something that makes you a better Christian? No. But does it help you focus on the faithfulness of God and how He answers prayers and allows you to be able to articulate things, just to ask Him in certain ways and just pour out your heart to Him? Yes. Does it help you to focus sometimes when you pray, when your mind's going 100 different directions and you think, okay, I just need to write a coherent thought to ask Him about this? Yes, it helps with that. So I encourage you, and you don't have to wait till January 1st to start. Start today. Start tomorrow. Get a little bitty notebook. Get something that you can write on. Write a sentence a day. Write a sentence of prayer or praise. Write out, 10 pages if you want to. But friends, it helps us to focus our hearts and minds. And so I want to encourage you in that. I want to encourage you to do those times of remembrance so you can remind yourself and you can remind others about the faithfulness of God. And so what are some of your Ebenezers? Think about that. Thank God for those. Blessings to you, friends. Until next time.